Hey guys, welcome to Maritime Punk. This week I'm talking with Steve Rawles from Canadian skate punk legends Belvedere. Thanks for taking the time to chat.
Thanks for having me.
Can you take me back to that original lineup, the beginning? Did you ever think it would be something that would last decades, or were you just a bunch of kids having fun?
Yeah, all of that. I started the band right at the end of, I think it was the end of 94, just getting out of high school. And it was just a three-piece at the time, a buddy that I'd met at a record store. And he played bass. And then we had this drummer that I went to school with as well, Dan. And yeah, we started writing tunes. And at the time, I ran a record label, so I was kind of like at that time I thought I was just going to be the guy behind other bands, right?
Right.
And but I liked playing music, and wasn't we weren't too good at that time. But as time kind of went on, um, we put out some releases and we started touring, and members changed. That at that time it was just like a local band that just played every once in a while, so there wasn't much there to keep anybody. So once we kind of found a solid lineup and we started going to California and doing Western Canada, that's kind of what ate up most of the mid to late 90s. And then, yeah, we toured with Bad Religion in 99, and we did a bunch of stuff with Warped Tour, and we did a bunch of US stuff kind of that 99, 2000 mark. And at that point, it was, I felt like the band was a lot better and we had something to say. And we were certainly hitting the road pretty hard. There was times that
Yeah.
we, in the early 2000s, where we were playing upwards of 200 shows a year, and it was kind of our whole life.
Was it tough to dive in to that life of being in a band? I know after a while it becomes second nature, but was there a moment where you kind of wondered, is this really what I want to do, or did it just kind of seem fun
Well,
and
that
natural?
that moment came later in '04 when we broke up, but
Yeah.
because the answer to that was no, I didn't want to do that anymore.
Mm,
Well, we all kind of felt that way, but up until that point, I mean, you don't ever just like go, okay, here we go, like now we're a full-time band. I don't think we didn't. It was certainly just, you know, we would book weekend. We were a weekend warrior band all through college, and then as
mm,
it started to become, we were gone for months at a time, and we started going to Europe and Japan and stuff, and um, we had labels, like bigger labels, that were putting our records out, and so there was bigger opportunities to support bigger bands and stuff, and so then it just kind of just took a life of its own.
yeah.
You go back and you work at the restaurant whenever you can afterwards, or the pizza delivery place, or
Mm.
um, but the whole focus was like, how can we drive the band at that point, until we drove it too hard, and then by mid 2000s we told each other to F off and call it quits.
Yeah. So going back to that era, there were a lot of strong Canadian bands. I remember Gob, Another Joe, Chicks Dig It. Was that helpful having some strong bands north of the border to either tour with or maybe even get some advice on how you could kind of build out of the country?
Well, I mean, at that time, yeah, I mean, we were kind of paving our own way for a long time. I mean, I would say that Chicks Dig It was probably the one band that really helped us out, just learning how to do work visas for the States, where it just seemed like I couldn't get help from anybody at that time. So, once we kind of figured that out, we just really started hitting it. But then once we kind of got shown what Europe looked like, it got harder to justify going to the States, spending thousands on work visas for basement shows in front of nobody. And so once we started going overseas, it kind of just that was the bulk of what we did, after about 2002, was just like
Mm,
a lot of Canada stuff, Warp Tour festivals, that kind of stuff, and then a bunch of Europe and overseas stuff.
yeah. Do you ever
But
have
yeah, I
those?
mean,
Oh, go ahead. Go
band
ahead.
wise, yeah, like there was Choke and there was Monine, and
Mm,
I think Gob did some stuff in the States, but did a lot of stuff in Canada at that time. And there was like Chicks Dig It were kind of like, they're from Calgary, so they were the band that I looked up to as,
yeah.
oh, hey, somebody from our city actually can do this, so we can too.
Yeah. Back in the day when you said they have a video and much music, they're huge. A little different
Yeah,
world
well, we
now
had a
with
few of those. It
YouTube,
didn't
but
make us huge, that's for sure.
did you ever have those sort of fanboy moments where you're on stage and then you realize like, holy crap, I'm playing on stage with this band that I used to listen to?
Had that moment a lot, and I still have it, to this day. I'm almost 50 now, and you'd be surprised at how, and maybe that's why I still do it, because I still like it. I feel like that 15-year-old kid that sometimes can't believe, where he's at, you know. I shouldn't say that because I book a lot of bands too that I'm fans of, but you know, the bands like Authority Zero and the Caddies and Cigar, and then
Mhm.
you know, outside of the booking stuff, like we've done shows with No Effects, and we toured South America with Pennywise, and we toured with Bad Religion, and you kind of go, you know, Rise Against too. You kind of scratch your head and you go, wow, like you play it cool, but of course you just it still means a lot and it still has impact. And that's why I feel fortunate that I get to still do this now is because yeah, that happens more than once. I can tell lots of stories where it kind of blows me away. I'm on tour or on stage with my superheroes.
Yeah, it's kind of wild to think of how many punk rock bands are still active because you look back in the 80s and 90s at different genres of music and like, oh, they were my favorite 20 years ago, but they're not playing anymore. But I go through my CD
Mhm.
collection from when I was in high school and I look them up and I'm like, holy shit, like all these bands are still playing music. So I guess maybe when you're kind of doing the DIY approach and you learn to live without a lot of the fruits of making it big on a one hit wonder, you maybe appreciate it a bit more, do you think?
I think so, but you know, I like you know bands like Pulley's a good example, a band that
Mm-hmm.
I grew up loving, and I bring them up to Canada every once in a while, and we've toured Europe together and stuff, and I still like we're all friends, but it's still you know it's that little kid in the back of your head that kind of goes like, hey, wow, like you're on tour with Pulley. Um, I think there's a really neat thing that can be said about punk rock and the indie sort of thing where we're all kind of swinging, you know, together. We're all trying to do festivals and shows and sort of extend this life that we have that we're probably way past the expiration. But I think the fact that you can go to a show and you can see a band in front of 500 people and then they walk off stage and then you can go have a beer with them
Mm-hmm.
afterwards speaks volumes about the kind of music and the scene that we're in. That, you know, for the most part, most of the bands that I deal with don't really have that sort of like, you know, barricade attitude. You know, there's a lot of times we play with barricades, but that's just a security thing. But
Yeah.
for the most part, we just rather just play and hang out with everybody afterwards. There's a real community mentality. And even 20, 30 years later, for a lot of these bands, they still feel that way.
Some of my hero bands coming through, like Bigwig, Douglas,
Hmm.
Remote, there'd be times when we'd just go party with them at the hotel. And you'd never get
Yeah.
that with these like huge bands like Metallica, but just being able to chat and get to know people behind the scenes and have a beer with them, it really kind of adds that other element of appreciation for your favorite
Well, I
bands.
think it creates lifelong fans too. Is that
Mm-hmm.
like, you know, there was a show that we played when we came back after we split up for 7 years, and we played the Opera House, and it was a lot bigger venue than we were normally playing for our own shows. And we played for like an hour and a half, and I remember just like looking out in the crowd, and you could just see people from all these different towns around Toronto. It's like I slept on your basement floor, I slept on your basement floor, and you kind of like you kind of grow this band the kind of music we play, you grow this band organically. It's one CD at a time, a record at a time, one interaction, one show, you know, one show with another band. Like you just kind of grow this a little bit at a time. And so it kind of feels like you got a lot of hands behind you pushing you along. So, you know, I don't know what it's like to put out a video and all of a sudden have a million fans. I know how to do a shit ton of shows over 20 years and feel like when you go into a town, you're not just seeing fans, but you're seeing friends. And, you know, that was to this day, I feel like we go to so many places where it's been a few years since we've been there. And while not everybody can come out because kids and lives and everything, a lot of people still try to come out and still, and you know, it's like you never left. You never, you know, it's been 5 years. I just, you know, but it feels like we just met, you know, a week ago. So I like that about the scene is that it's a whole group of people that kind of make this band and they're invested into it. And so I feel like we have some of the best bands in the world.
Have you ever had those big in Japan moments where you play a show and out of nowhere everyone knows the words and you're like what's going on here?
Yeah, Japan's always a trip because I never thought my band would actually make any kind of mark anywhere outside of like, you know, Calgary. So that one always throws me off. We've done some stuff in South America, like we did Venezuela and Colombia and Ecuador kind of back in the early 2000s. But we didn't play Brazil at that time because we had a Europe tour that kind of came up. But for years, people have been saying like you got to come to Brazil, and like that's the big joke. Everybody says that about their band, like come to Brazil. But we went down there with with Less Than Jake in 2012, and I was blown away. Like there were huge shows, and everybody was singing along, and it's like, how did I not know this? You know?
Yeah.
And so you kind of learn the stories of how a label put the record out, like back in the day, and it really got some steam. And um, you know, every time we go down there, it's insane. And it's awesome. We feel really lucky that, I think like Brazil is particularly like a really strong place for us, and that always kind of throws me off a bit. It's pretty rad.
Thinking of modern times with Spotify needing 100,000 plays to get like 10 cents, do you think vinyl is kind of like the saving grace, how people are buying physical media again? Do you think that kind of saved a lot of bands, or do you still not see a whole lot of that?
I don't I don't know if it saved it. I mean, the whole 100,000 to get 10 cents is definitely like a bit of an exaggeration because bands do make money off streaming. They just don't make as much as they should make. Um, if you're, and I think that's something that needs to be addressed at some point. If you're streaming Spotify, you probably couldn't be fucking that band over more. But at the same time, as a band that like wants their music out, like you know, I look at it the same way I did when Napster was a thing. It was, at least people are listening to the music and hopefully they'll come to the show.
Hmm.
There's certainly other pay methods that pay more. Apple pays more than Spotify, Deezer, whatever else, but ultimately, like, the hope is that, like, you spread the music through the playlists or whatever, and then they'll come to the show, maybe pick up a record or come see your band or buy a t-shirt or whatever. And I still maintain that's the best way to grow your band organically is to, however there's so many bands out there. So how do you like break through that? And if people are hearing you on a playlist or something on Spotify, that really, I mean, I
Yeah.
don't love the business model for sure, but I mean, at least people are listening to the music. And why did you put out music anyways? Did you put out music to sell records? I don't know. That doesn't seem like a very smart move. You should probably go and get a degree in something then.
Exactly. That's how everyone in South America knows your music. Maybe just from maybe they wouldn't have been at that show had they not been listening to music, streaming it, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, I know that's why it is. Like that's 100% why our band has fans in Brazil. We sold a decent amount of records down there, but not nothing compared to what the shows reflect now. It's crazy.
Back in the old days, two compilations were kind of the Spotify playlists for my generation. You would get a Punkorama or a Fat Records
Yeah.
comp, and that was your discovery going through zines. It was more of an intricate process, and now you play something on Spotify, and it's like
Hmm.
you might like this band.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I had a label for 10 years, so I put out a couple of comps and it was awesome. You just like, you dish it out, albums to each band. So they'd all go tour around and they'd sell their 30 or 50 copies. And then everybody kind of like spread out. It was like an organic way to do this before we had proper distribution in Canada and overseas. So, you know, again, it was just like trying to be as creative as you could in a analog age,
Yeah.
before the internet.
Mm. Do you remember what it was like when you hit the stage after that Belvedere hiatus and you finally got in front of everyone and were able to play those songs again? What was that like?
Yeah, that was good. Our first show was in Paris, actually, and then we played this big show at Girls Rock in front of about, I don't even know how many people, lots of people. But um, that was a cool intro back into Europe again. And then when we did our stuff in Canada, we were playing much bigger venues than we had when we split up and everything was sold out. We actually had a Willem Scream open up the Toronto, Montreal, and Ottawa date. And again, like what a fun couple of days that was. That
Yeah.
was it was a trip.
Before we sign off, a little plug for your upcoming tour with Mad Caddies. Can you give us a little bit of the juice on that?
Yeah, well, I got two tours to plug actually. So we're doing the West Coast Canada with caddies from Victoria to Winnipeg. That's it. Starts February 20th in Victoria, and then we they continue across Canada, and then we spin south from Winnipeg. We go down to Denver and make our way down to California, and we do the West Coast, which we haven't done in the States in probably 20 years. So um, those are the two tours that'll keep us busy for the late end of the winter and early spring.
Hmm. And I know it's not always easy to add this into your tour, but we definitely would love to see you here in the Maritimes, New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, PI, Newfoundland. So if you can make that happen,
I,
you'll make a lot of people happy.
I would love to do that, and we should definitely talk about how we can do that because, yeah, I if we could yeah, come out for a couple of Quebec shows and just kind of go east this time. I'd like to play some of those cities again for sure, and I've never been to Newfoundland, so that's definitely on my list as well.
Nice. So that was Steve Rawles with Belvedere. Check them out on tour and indulge yourself and enjoy. Thanks for doing this.
Yeah, thanks for having me.